Chuang 1. Environment. Q1. How concerned are you about environmental issues in general? Quite concerned, honestly, though it took me a while to get there. For a long time I thought of environmental damage as something abstract, happening somewhere far away. It wasn't until I started paying attention to local news that it felt real. Q2. What's one environmental habit you've changed in your own life? I've gotten much more careful about waste. Small things, like carrying my own bag instead of picking up a new one every time. It's not dramatic, but it's a habit built on growing awareness rather than guilt. Q3. What are the advantages and disadvantages of strict environmental regulations? Strict regulations force industries to reduce their environmental impact, which is necessary given how much human activity has already reshaped ecosystems. The downside is that regulations can slow economic growth in the short term, and smaller businesses sometimes struggle to keep up with the cost of compliance. Q4. Can you describe a moment that made you more aware of environmental damage? I visited a coastal town a few years ago where the beach was covered in plastic that had washed in from somewhere else entirely. It had such a negative effect on the whole landscape that I couldn't stop thinking about it for weeks afterward. Q5. How do you think environmental protection will evolve in the future? I think we'll see governments finally take initiative on a larger scale, not just relying on individuals to change habits. There's also a real need to raise awareness among younger generations before the damage becomes irreversible. Underscore 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 underscore. Chuang 2. Climate change. Q1. How visible is climate change in the place where you live? More visible than it used to be. Summers feel noticeably hotter than they did when I was a kid, and storms seem to arrive with less warning than before. Q2. What do you think is the biggest misconception about climate change? That it's a distant problem for future generations. People often underestimate how rapidly changing conditions already are. It's not some far-off scenario anymore. It's happening in real time. Q3. What are the pros and cons of individual action versus government policy in tackling climate change? Individual action matters, small choices add up, and they shift culture over time. But without climate change being addressed through actual policy, individual effort alone can't match the scale of the problem. Emissions increase dramatically when large industries aren't held accountable, and no amount of individual recycling offsets that. Q4. Can you describe a natural disaster or extreme weather event that affected you or someone you know? A friend's hometown was hit by a severe flood a couple of years ago, a genuine natural disaster that displaced hundreds of families. It really brought home how the serious consequences of climate change aren't hypothetical anymore. Q5. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about how climate change will be handled in the future? Cautiously optimistic, I'd say. There's still a real potential risk that action comes too late, but I've also seen genuine momentum, more investment, more public pressure. That gives me some hope. Underscore 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 underscore. Underscore 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 underscore. Chuang 3. Science. Q1. What role does science play in your everyday life? More than I usually notice, from the medicine in my cabinet to the phone in my pocket, almost everything around me exists because someone once decided to conduct research into a question nobody had answered yet. Q2. Is there a scientific topic you find particularly fascinating? Space, definitely. I love reading about how the scientific community keeps revising its own theories as new evidence comes in. It's humbling, honestly, how much we still don't know. Q3. What are the benefits of scientific research being open and shared globally? Open research lets scientists across the world build on each other's work instead of duplicating it. When findings are shared, It becomes much easier to test a theory rigorously. More eyes checking the same scientific evidence means fewer mistakes slip through. Q4. Can you describe a scientific discovery that surprised you? I remember reading about how certain technological advances in medicine came from research that was originally meant for something completely unrelated. It's strange how much progress comes from unexpected directions. Q5. How do you think science will change our lives in the future? I think we'll see science increasingly promote the development of solutions to problems we've struggled with for decades: disease, food security, energy. Scientists will keep needing to undertake research in areas that don't yet have obvious answers, and that unpredictability is part of what makes it exciting. Underscore 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 underscore. Chuang 4. Government. Q1. How closely do you follow government policy and news? Fairly closely, though it depends on the topic. I try to stay informed about anything that could genuinely shape daily life: housing, healthcare, that sort of thing. Q2. What's an area where you think government involvement is necessary? Public transport, honestly. Without proper government policy guiding infrastructure, cities end up with systems that are inconsistent or underfunded, and that affects everyone, not just people who can't afford a car. Q3. What are the advantages and disadvantages of government control over public services? Government control can ensure services stay accessible to everyone, not just those who can pay a premium. But too much control, without accountability, can lead to inefficiency. A mix involving the private sector, with a solid regulatory framework in place, often works better than either extreme alone. Q4. Can you describe a government policy that directly affected your life? A change in tax policy a few years back genuinely affected my household budget. Nothing dramatic, but enough that I noticed it every month. It made me pay much closer attention to policy discussions after that. Q5. How do you think the role of government will change in the future? I think there'll be more pressure to address issues like inequality directly, alongside a growing demand for equal opportunity, regardless of background. Whether governments manage to keep up with that pressure is a different question entirely. Underscore 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 underscore. Chuang 5. Society. Q1. What social issue do you care most about? Access to education, probably. I think it shapes almost everything else: health, opportunity, even how connected people feel to the world around them. Q2. How has society changed in your lifetime that surprises you most? Honestly, how quickly opinions can shift. Things that felt fixed when I was younger have changed faster than I expected, partly because information now spreads so fast. Q3. What are the benefits of a diverse society? A diverse society brings a diverse range of ideas and perspectives, which tends to lead to better problem-solving overall. It also fosters a mutual understanding between groups that might otherwise never interact. Q4. Can you describe an experience that changed your perspective on a social issue? I once volunteered with a group supporting a vulnerable group in my city, people dealing with housing insecurity. Seeing their actual living conditions up close changed how I thought about the issue far more than any article ever had. Q5. How do you think society will look in 50 years? I think there will be greater awareness of issues that today still feel niche: mental health, long-term sustainability, things like that. The younger generation already seems to care more openly about these topics than previous ones did. Underscore 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 underscore. Chuang 6. Culture. Q1. How connected do you feel to your own cultural background? Fairly connected, though it comes and goes. Certain traditions, especially around food and family gatherings, still feel deeply tied to my cultural background, even when daily life feels quite modern otherwise. Q2. What's something from another culture you've come to appreciate? I've come to really appreciate how some cultures treat mealtimes as something unhurried, almost sacred. It's closely associated with a slower pace of life that I honestly wish I practiced more myself. Q3. What are the benefits and risks of cultures blending together more than before? Blending cultures often leads to genuinely exciting creativity, food, music, art that wouldn't exist otherwise. It's now widely accepted that this exchange enriches everyone involved. The risk, though, is that smaller or more fragile traditions can get diluted or forgotten if they're not deliberately preserved. Q4. Can you describe a moment you felt a strong sense of cultural identity? At a family celebration a couple of years ago, a certain dish was prepared exactly the way it's generally known as traditional in my family. Nothing had changed in generations. That kind of continuity gave me a real sense of belonging in a way I hadn't expected. Q5. How do you think culture will evolve in an increasingly connected world? I think we'll need a deep understanding of other traditions to avoid flattening everything into one homogeneous global culture. Within a broader global context, preserving distinct identity is going to matter more, not less, even as connection increases. Underscore 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 underscore. Underscore 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 underscore. Chuang 7. Globalization. Q1. How has globalization affected your daily life? Enormously, actually. Even in small ways, the food I eat, the clothes I wear, most of it comes from global trade networks I never really think about until I stop to consider it. Q2. What's a product or trend you've seen spread globally? Coffee culture, weirdly specific as that sounds. What used to feel like a regional habit is now practically universal, part of a wider global trend that's fascinating how consistent it's become across so many different countries. Q3. What are the advantages and disadvantages of global trade? Global trade drives economic growth and gives consumers access to imported products they'd otherwise never see. But it also creates increased competition that can hurt local producers who can't match the scale of larger international suppliers. Q4. Can you describe how globalization has affected job opportunities where you live? Industrial development tied to international investment has created new jobs in my area, but it's also shifted the kind of work available, more service-based roles, fewer traditional manufacturing ones. Q5. Do you think globalization will continue at the same pace in the future? I think it's highly likely to continue, though maybe not always in the same direction. There's an ever-increasing pull toward interconnected economies, even as the vast majority of countries occasionally push back with more protective policies. Underscore 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 underscore. Underscore 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 underscore. Chuang 8. Future. Q1. What excites you most about the future? Honestly, the pace of future development in areas like medicine and clean energy. It feels like problems that seemed permanent might actually be solvable within our lifetime. Q2. What worries you most about the future? Inequality, mostly, that the benefits of progress won't be shared evenly, and some groups will be left further behind while others race ahead. Q3. What are the benefits and risks of rapid technological and social change? Rapid change brings genuine opportunity, new tools, new ways of solving old problems. But it also brings significant change that societies aren't always prepared to absorb quickly, and that gap between innovation and adaptation is where a lot of the real risk lies. Q4. Can you describe a prediction you made that turned out to be completely wrong? Years ago, I was convinced a certain technology trend would fade within a year. It's now completely mainstream. It taught me to hold predictions a little more loosely, honestly. It's highly unlikely that anyone gets these things fully right. Q5. If you could influence one thing about the future, what would it be? I'd want people to have greater flexibility in how they build their lives, work, family, purpose, without feeling boxed into one path too early. That's my ultimate goal, in a way, not just for myself but for whoever comes after us, a world with a bit more room to breathe.